was. It looked like it was money. I don't know what it was. It was a flying saucer or what it was. It wasn't an airplane. It was not an airplane. It was down awfully low.
You are listening to Pursuit of the Paranormal podcast with your host, Ash Ellis.
Welcome to this week's episode of Pursuit of the Paranormal. We've got a very special guest, very interesting guest, joining us this week. That is Dr. Bruce Rapuano. Apologies, you probably correct the pronunciation.
Did a great job.
Nice one. Ph.D. So we've got some very interesting themes and topics to talk about from Bruce's own background and history of alien abduction and stuff like that. So, Bruce, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you. It's great to be with you on your show and meet you finally.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you. And so we're going to be talking about mostly today your book, which is The Million Lost, A Scientist's Own Alien Abduction Encounters. Pretty self-explanatory title, I think, that kind of covers the main themes of the book. But before we go into that, obviously, you're a PhD, you got your doctorate. It's very quite interested in the topics that you've been studying. Just want to give a bit of a background because I know the listeners will be interested in kind of your scientific background before we go into the more unusual topics.
Well, I had an interest in neuroscience at kind of a young age. I majored in neurobiology and minored in psychology at the University of Pennsylvania. And then it really provoked an interest again, or stimulated my interest in neuroscience even more. I had to go on and get a neuroscience Ph.D. and actually in neuropharmacology, which is the study of the effects of drugs on the brain at the University of Connecticut. And I've been working as a cell biologist for my entire career as a biomedical research scientist. I worked at places, I did cancer research at the top cancer research hospital in America, Memorial Sloan-Kettering Cancer Center in New York City. I also spent the bulk of my career at doing orthopedic research, developing the next generation of artificial knees and artificial hips at the top orthopedic hospital in the U.S., which is Hospital for Special Surgery, also in New York City. And in the meantime, in my spare time, I managed to get a law degree, a J.D. from New York Law School, because I had a lot of lawyers in my family. I was interested in what the law, the study of law, and that particular profession was all about. And so I've got a kind of unique background for someone who has had personal experiences with this phenomenon of UFO close encounters and alien abductions. And a unique perspective in terms of how one would observe the phenomenon, formulate certain theories about it. That maybe the person who doesn't have a science background might have a slightly different perspective. So that's how I look at the phenomenon from mainly scientific perspective, based on my background.
Amazing. I like how you say in your spare time you got a law degree. That's just obviously a very, very intelligent guy. So I can't wait to talk a bit more about some of this. Obviously, we're going to be talking about a lot of paranormal themes that are in your book. So as a biomedical scientist, how do you reconcile the scientific background with the paranormal themes that we're going to be talking about?
Well, what the goal of writing the book was, the main goal was to be as analytical as possible in looking at not only my experiences, but the experiences of really thousands of people that parallel my experiences so remarkably closely. And if I can do that in a way that persuades the reader, then I have some objectivity, that I'm able to, draw some conclusions about certain aspects of the phenomenon, the UFOs, their the way they move about, their propulsion systems, or the actual ETs or aliens, whatever you like to call them, in terms of what their physical nature is, and and I discuss, uh, speculate based on what's been reported in the UFO literature already about what their biological nature might be, how closely similar they are to human beings, where they came from. But if I'm successful in analyzing this phenomenon from my particular perspective and my particular background, I'm hoping that will cause the great bulk of the scientific community all over the world who's really not been looking at this phenomenon, taking it
Mm.
seriously at all, even today, to maybe look in our direction and not only wake up to the possibility that it may be real, but also consider it a subject that's worthwhile of scientific investigation. So I'm just one person. I'm hoping that in the next 1 to 5 years that there are hundreds and thousands of scientists um, come forward. Maybe many of them have had the same experiences I've had, but more importantly, have decided, we have to get together as a community, a coalition of scientists, and start taking the subject seriously and begin and start to investigate it as a community of scientists. So again, that's my object, and that's my hope, um, uh, that will be a direct result of me writing and publishing this book.
Yeah, hopefully. It's kind of on that note, you've authored a lot of peer-reviewed work, obviously in the field that you're in. How has this work, this side of you, kind of been received by your colleagues and peers?
I haven't had any negative feedback. To tell you the truth, I think there are a lot of, well, I won't say a lot, but there are definitely scientists out there that are, if they're not willing to come forward, they contact me, and I have to respect their, the confidentiality, and they've come forward to me and reported to me their experiences. Some very high level government scientists in the states that they weren't my colleagues. I have not done research with them
Mm.
personally, but again, they're reluctant to tell the colleagues they're working with, but they did come forward to me, and in a number of cases, not only relate what happened to them, but certainly express their appreciation for uh, my openness, my transparency, and talking about my own personal experiences. So overall, I have to say the feedback I've gotten from members of the scientific community has been all positive. Fortunately, I'm sure there's some people that still, no matter how much evidence you put in front of them, still have this bias against,
Mm.
taking this particular phenomenon seriously. But we have to get to as many minds as possible, and realizing, with the realization we're not going to be able to persuade everyone to take this seriously.
Do you think that there's still a risk to people's careers by potentially speaking out about this topic?
I write about this in the book, and I still think that, if you're trying to get funding for your research, and the people that are reviewing your applications and reviewing your scientific papers know that you published a book about your UFO close encounters, or your contact with an ETs or some advanced alien civilization. It has to consciously and subconsciously affect how your particular scientific work is going to be reviewed.
Mm.
Now, I always bring up the case of Gary Nolan, who's, I think, the most prominent American scientist who's come forward and said, I've
Yeah.
had these experiences. But he admittedly, like myself, very established scientist, close to the ends of our career than in the beginning. And I think, he's at the point where he can almost privately fund any research he wants to do, whether it has to do with ETs and UFOs, or whether it has to do with immunology or molecular biology, which is his field of expertise. But I have to say, if someone's starting out, whether they're at the beginning of their scientific career, research career, or in the middle, it has to be still very difficult for them to really attach their name to the uh, um, to the study of this
Mm.
phenomenon, even today.
Yeah, I mean, sadly, I think a lot of kind of high kind of careers like that, where you think of pilots and stuff, where if their
Right.
superiors think
Good
they're having
example.
these experiences, are the superiors going to think, is he fit enough to fly a fighter jet? If they don't believe these stories, they think he's maybe losing it or something like this. Are they going to think is he sort of mentally well enough
You
to
know,
fly these
it's a
planes?
great point. Great point. Ash, we know there are hundreds and thousands of these. I call them prime witnesses. The commercial and military, pilots. We never hear their stories. We've heard a few stories, but that's just the tip of the iceberg, really, because 95% of the pilots that have seen these things in the skies, they're never going to report them because they know they're going to lose their job. So that's that. I think that's pretty sad, because we would learn a lot more about the phenomenon if all those, as I say, prime witnesses can come forward with their stories and expert observations.
Yeah, definitely. It's a shame that, like with your profession and other similar ones, that it's just that too much. Like, especially like say early in your career, like you got too much
Right,
to lose
especially.
to especially some people can become quite famous, not in a good way because of it, coming out and then again get ridiculed and stuff, and it can like affect the whole life going forward. And
We
just
have
why
to
would you
wait
do
for
that when
these.
you got a good career?
Exactly. Well, we have to wait for what we call these deathbed confessions, where a lot of scientists and people that are right in the middle of this phenomenon, they wait until they're at the very tail end of their, not only their careers, but their lives to write books or, go on TV shows or podcasts to talk about it. But that's too late. We need to hear as much of these stories as possible and gather as much information and hopefully, quote unquote scientific data as we can, in my opinion, as soon as possible.
Definitely. One kind of final question around the kind of your work, obviously neurobiology, stuff like that, is the brain. And a lot of people say that a lot of this stuff, a lot of people experiences, it's kind of, they believe it to be true, but it's something happening in the brain that's causing them to see it or experience it. What's kind of your thoughts around the psychological, I guess, side of the experiences that some people claim to have?
Well, the first comment I make is, many many of these witnesses, particularly the contactees or abductees, we think only remember what happened to them through regressive hypnosis, but the greater percentage of them actually, like myself, have consciously recalled these experiences. And there's such close similarities in a number of different aspects of the abduction phenomenon across not only hundreds but thousands of witnesses. And I go over this in the book, where I relate my own particular experiences with respect to the fact that I can check every box in what I call the core alien abduction phenomenon, that, as I say, thousands of people have experiences. And when I say thousands, those are the thousands that abduction investigators have met and interviewed.
Yeah.
Number one, that I don't know how so many people can be having the same dreams or hallucinations to almost to the last final detail. Number two, many of these abduction events, including mine, have had multiple witnesses that may or may not have been a part of a target or part of the abduction event, but witnessed the approach of the UFO during the close encounter. Were aware of certain strange signs in the environment. Number three, in addition to the fact that not some people, all these people can't be having the same dream. There are multiple witnesses to these events. Number three, there are also many different types of physical evidence. The abductees, many of the abductees, 10, 20, 30%, all report the same scars in the same part of their body. They have the same physical symptoms: unexplained nosebleeds or scars inside their nasal cavity. And so it's the physical evidence together with the witnesses and the reproducibility of these abduction reports that have persuaded me that this is not something that arose in the realm of the imagination, but is a real
Mm.
phenomenon, a nuts and bolts phenomenon where there's been contact between human beings and, in my opinion, biological organisms from some other planet, some other dimension. We don't know where they came from, but they're definitely representative of an advanced non-human intelligence. So that's the conclusions that I've drawn in my book, Dominion Lost, and that parallel the conclusions of many people that have studied this phenomenon.
So your own experiences. Let's get into this. And these started very young, at a very young age for you. You want to
Usually,
kind of just
yeah.
maybe go back to when it first started, to your earliest memory of your experiences.
It's so striking that when you talk to abductees, and the great majority of them say they can remember their first experience at the age of 5 or 6, and I'm the same. I don't know why that particular age, but I can remember. It was in the summertime, and it was actually this. Do you remember the first reported abduction case of Betty and Barney Hill in the U.S.? You've heard of that?
Yeah.
That was in '61. Well, 2 or 3 months before that, that was in September of '61. It was in the summertime, and I remember distinctly so many details of this particular event. 6 years old, I'm lying in bed. It's maybe 7:30 in the evening, shortly before dusk, and I'm just nodding off to sleep. My attention is drawn to a glint, a flash of light outside my bedroom window, and I look out the window, and I see the strangest looking airplane I've ever seen in my life. It's it's very it's even in the waning sunlight. It's highly reflective. It's clearly it's clearly a metallic object, but that's the first thing that drew my attention. The reflection of sunlight off the highly polished surface of this craft. It was just flying right over the rooftops of the apartment buildings in my neighborhood, maybe 5 or 6 blocks away from where I was. And it, although I thought it was an airplane, I thought I saw wings. The fuselage, or at least the diameter of the fuselage, looked to be too large relative to the length, in that it looked more circular than tubular, like an airplane would look. I saw what I thought was a bolt of lightning strike the tail. It was some discharge of electricity that was a little bit frightening to me. But ordinarily, I would have been so curious to look at this object um, and watch it until it drifted, past my bedroom window. I did something very strange. I turned my head away from it, turned my head to the left, away from the window, put my head back on the pillow as if under command, and immediately fell asleep. And then when I woke up, I wasn't in my bedroom anymore. I looked like I was in some type of operating theater. I was definitely on some type of examination table. I don't remember if it felt cold to the touch, but it definitely felt like a hard surface. I didn't know what the material was. One thing I remember, it was far too long and far too wide to accommodate the body of a 6-year-old child. So I remember being a very large table. And then I was somehow attracted by some commotion in front of me, maybe 20 feet from the foot of the table, and slowly sat up. And when I did, I was aghast because I saw dozens of beings, and I call them beings. They look humanoid. They were actually no taller than I was, but they were white in color. They all looked like clones of one another, very uniform, same dimensions, same height, same, um, looked all to be the same weight. They all had disproportionately large, hairless heads. I can only see them from the side, so I couldn't really make out their facial features. But half of them were walking very briskly from left to right, and the other half in the other direction. They looked like they had a seriousness of purpose, like they were involved in some particular uh, work that they looked very industrious. They looked like uh, I thought they were doctors, but they looked like the strangest doctors I had ever seen. But I was convinced I was in some type of a hospital, and the beings I was looking at were doctors of some type. And I think I'll stop there in case you have any questions to ask about this particular experience.
So I guess how, as a 6-year-old child, what was your feelings, if you can remember, kind of the emotions or were you feeling at that time?
Well, I'll talk about one emotion. One emotion I felt, which I was, which was provoked by what happened right after this scene I just described to you. The point at which I ended it. For some reason, I realized that it was not right that I was taken by. I don't know who these people were, these beings were, against my will, and I pointed at them and I said, "Hey, you're not my doctors. What business did you have taking me from my bedroom and bringing me? I don't know where I was, bringing me to this particular place. For whatever purpose, I had no idea at that point. But going forward, several months from that, I had been having some very painful ear infections several months before that particular experience, and then that was in late June, late July, and then the late fall, early winter of that same year, these ear infections recurred. But I remember thinking that this particular experience had something to do with my ear infections. Now, I didn't think they were the cause. I thought that I was being treated in some type of a hospital for these infections. And the strange thing was when I actually had an operation, my ear, nose, and throat doctor had suggested I have my tonsils and adenoids removed, and that would maybe cause my ear infections to clear up. I actually told him just before I went under anesthesia. That was February of the next year. Doctor, I said, why did I have to have 2 operations? That's how convinced I was that this was a real experience. And he looked at me quizzically. He had almost a startled look on his face. Didn't answer me, and so that was the feelings I had about it were not feelings of anxiety or fear or anger. It was almost as if I'd integrated this experience into what was going on in my life to try to make some sense of it. So I can't say that there was any at that time any emotional trauma that resulted from it, strangely enough.
Did you tell your parents or family about it at this point?
That's the strange thing. I never did. I don't know why. It's as if somehow I was made to understand that I should be quiet about it. That maybe there was no reason to tell my parents, or I was given some type of, for lack of a better expression, post-hypnotic suggestion never to talk about it. I've had other experiences where that feeling that I was being suggested or directed or commanded not to tell my parents or my family what was happening to me happened again that same year. I just alluded to all the different types of physical evidence that's associated with this abduction phenomenon. One of the types of evidence I mentioned was the unexplained nosebleed. And I think it was probably a couple months after the experience I just described to you, where for some reason, and this was a real episode of what's known in the literature as missing time, where I was in my apartment all by myself, six-year-old boy. I didn't know what I'd been doing that day, with my back against the wall in the hallway between our front door and the bathroom. And for some reason, I felt that there was some moisture under each nostril. I didn't know if I was having a runny nose. I had a cold before that. And then I heard a voice in my head, which I knew was not my voice, telling me, don't let them see the blood. And I did something very strange. I didn't even know I was bleeding, but I ran to the bathroom. I was horrified when I looked in the mirror to find out that, yes, I had a nosebleed from each nostril. Quickly washed some blood on my face, not more than 20 seconds later, my mother and brother walked in the apartment to see me coming out of the bathroom, but all the evidence was gone. So that was when I realized that, there's somebody telling me not to talk about these experiences.
Did the operation you had, did that stop the ear infections afterwards?
Well, yes, but I'm assuming that our ear, nose, and throat surgeon was right. He had made the correct diagnosis that if I had my tonsils and adenoids removed, that those ear infections would not recur, and they didn't. So I don't know if that was just something that was going on with my health that had nothing to do with my abduction experiences, or whether they were related in somehow. I really don't know. But the answer to your question is yes, they did go away after my tonsils were removed.
Cool. Kind of a side kind of question before we continue with the experiences. You say that you remember all these experiences without the need for like hip regression or anything like that. Do you think you may have other ones that are hidden that you don't remember, other experiences?
Yes, I have to admit that it's logical to assume that I've not been able to consciously recall the great bulk of each of these experiences. You remember the beginning. If you have a UFO close encounter, you remember when the UFO approaches. You remember when the UFO flies away at fantastic speed. That's the normal abduction scenario. But that middle part of the abduction event is usually the part that is missing from memory. That's the part that has to be retrieved through regressive hypnosis, which I've not had. Now, if I did, I'm assuming that it's likely that I would recover more of each of those episodes. So, but what I've consciously recalled, I'm assuming is maybe is a relatively small percentage of the total event itself in each case.
Have you ever wanted to explore that?
I thought about it, and I've been asked that question a number of times, and the problem I have in my case is that the experiences I talk about in the book all happened before any of this was in the popular culture. There was no talk about aliens, what they look like, in periodicals, television, movies, when I had my experiences. But now, of course, fast forward to 2024, and not only is it a dominant part of our popular culture, but I've studied it. I've read hundreds of books. I've thought about my experiences, how they compare to the experiences of thousands of people like me. So it's difficult for me to believe that won't contaminate a hypnosis regression session. Everything I've remembered, maybe I've forgotten most of what I've read or thought about regarding this phenomenon that might bleed through during the hypnosis sessions. So I'm a little bit skeptical that it's going to be beneficial in accurately recovering what really happened to me in my particular case.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's
enough. A technical issue. Yeah, that would be definitely significant in my case.
Yeah, for sure. Good points as well. Good points about that. Especially like for your experiences as a 6-year-old, without it being the popular culture, to I imagine that would be a hard thing to do. Like it's not something that a 6-year-old brain would probably even think about creating if it's like imagination or anything. It's so it kind of leads more that happens.
As I hate to repeat again, but that's something that I talked about that happened even before Betty and Barney Hill. So I don't know how that could come from my imagination and then mirror so closely what happened to so many people in that era in the 60s. Before many people have come forward with accounts from the 60s, and in the ensuing decades, decade after decade, it's replicated with later generations as well. So yeah, but I have thought about it. I have thought about trying to find a good hypnosis therapist.
Fair enough. So after these first experiences, did they carry on like throughout your childhood?
As I got into my teens, I did have experiences, and you know, they definitely recall many of the experiences of other people when they were first abducted in their childhood, their early teens, early adulthood. In that, those experiences in my teens seem to indicate there was an interest in on the part of the ETs or aliens in obtaining genetic material, as they've tried to obtain, according to all the abduction accounts, as they've tried to obtain this material from men and women in thousands of cases. And even Barney Hill was reluctant to come forward with this aspect of his particular experience. It took him, I think, 3 weeks or more while he was in his hypnosis sessions with Dr. Benjamin Simon before he was even able to come forward and say that he remembered that consciously. So that seems to be the focus as the abductee reaches adulthood. That there's there is an interest in the abductee as a biological subject for certain types of experimentation, but also as a source of genetic material for what we now believe are hybridization experiments. And I won't go into that particular theory in detail because that's been covered by quite a few abduction investigators.
No, fair enough. So moving the story on a little bit. When was the next kind of major event that happened that you talk about in your book after this time?
At what point? In my teens?
Yeah. So kind of move. Yeah. So as you were getting older, say the experience happening when you were a teen. What
I
happened?
mean, I had one of the strangest, most compelling um, experiences, which is, as I say, falls within the abduction scenario. Uh, in the summer, I must have been 11, 12, 13 years old, and you know what I think I first felt was contact, because many abductees have mentioned when they're first contacted, they feel a jolt of electricity. It's almost as if their skin becomes electrified. Well, that happened to me um, in the strangest and most startling of ways, in that I was jolted out of a sound sleep, literally pulled up. My torso was pulled up out of bed. I sat up as if I was pulled up by the strings of, as if I was pulled up upward like I was a puppet pulled up by a marionette, and woke up completely alert, and then decided that I was about to have some type of contact with some non-human intelligence. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know if it was I was going to make contact with the afterlife, or what beings I was about to make contact with. But I felt something unusual was about to happen, and I had to get out of bed in the middle of the night, not alert my parents, walk out of my house. This was probably in middle of the summer, so it was quite warm outside. Didn't even take time to put on my shoes or slippers, and in my pajamas, walked out of the house, across the street to a neighbor's property where there was a very large clearing. And I didn't know what I was going to encounter, but after walking about 100 yards, for some reason, again, as if on command, I stopped in the middle of someone's back lawn. Again, it was a very large clearing. And I looked up to the left in the sky. I don't know why I did this. And I saw a bright light over a neighbor's house. And it was during this particular experience where I suddenly lost all sensation. I won't say I was paralyzed, but I had no urge. It's almost as if I had lost the will to move my body. But I stood there. I was blind. I couldn't see anything. I couldn't hear anything. I had some sensation in my body I could feel, because I felt some type of a touching in my lower area, and that's the time. And this is a very similar. Um, this part of the experience is very similar to what Barney Hill reported when he was on board the UFO. And this is the time during which I felt I had genetic material removed from me. And the next thing I knew, the light was gone. I'm now completely conscious in that I've recovered all my faculties. I can move, I can see, I can hear. And I decided there's nothing else for me to do but to walk back to my house, confused, disappointed that I didn't really learn anything I thought I was going to learn. I didn't make contact with what I thought I might make contact with. Went inside my house, got into bed, and went to sleep. And almost as if I'm following instructions to doing exactly what I'm being told to do. And that's how that particular experience concluded.
Do you think that whoever's doing it, are the same creatures or beings that were the first ones that came to you? Do you think they're the same people?
Interestingly enough, yes, Ash, because that particular clearing was the same site of a UFO close encounter that had happened 3 years ago, or 2 or 3 years ago, that was witnessed by 8 other individuals.
Right.
The UFO we saw was right over that clearing, but we were, we're on our property. I hadn't left, my house. Happened to be playing a game of kickball. Again, it was also in the summertime, same time of year, and I saw this light. I was the first to see it. We were playing 4-on-4 a game of kickball in our front yard, and couldn't really see it because the view was obstructed by a large oak tree we had in the center of our front lawn. So I walked south toward our front door where I could get a better view of it. It's just astonishing what I'd seen. This what I call this a star that looked like the biblical star of Bethlehem. The star of Bethlehem that is described in the Bible, but it wasn't a point source of light like from an airplane, helicopter, star, or planet. This literally was 2.5 to 3 times the size of the full moon, and it was motionless. It was silent, and we looked at it again. My classmates and friends gathered around where I was now. Their attention had been drawn to me leaving the game and actually looking up at the sky. So we were all looking at it for 30 to 60 seconds. It got very strange at that point because I noticed what many abduction investigators have referred to as the Oz effect, the Wizard of Oz effect, where everything becomes quiet, everything seems to slow down. It's almost as if an air of strangeness has descended over the environment. Mm. And I purposely looked away from the UFO because I thought maybe I was so absorbed in the experience that I wasn't, attending to, what was going on in my surrounding environment. I looked away from it toward our backyard, and I still couldn't hear anything. Whereas before the UFO approached, we could hear the insects, the grasshoppers, and crickets, the noise from which was deafening at that time of year. But when I looked away from the UFO again, I couldn't hear anything. I was quite surprised. What was more astonishing and even alarming was that when I looked at my classmate next to me, he looked as if he was frozen in place. He wasn't talking, he wasn't moving, and this was very, at that moment, concerning to me. So concerning that I looked away from him back toward the UFO because I didn't really want to deal with what was happening, which many abductees have reported when they're with other people that maybe aren't targets of the abduction. Almost in every case, they report that the people with them, they're either rendered unconscious, switched off, immobilized, and then the abduction occurs. And then when they're returned, the people they're with somehow recover consciousness. And this is what appeared to be happening to me during that particular event, which I think was another abduction event, because the people on my, not only was the boy on my left not moving, I didn't detect any emotion or conversation or noise from the group, the larger group on my right. And after that, when the UFO had flown away, we convened to, to kind of compare notes, discuss what we had all seen, and I clearly had missed some of the details of the UFO because it had transitioned from a, like what looked like a star into a fireball. And then at that point, I could see it was moving. And then in about a minute and a half, it flew in constant direction, altitude, and speed until it disappeared over the horizon. But there were aspects of it that other people saw that I didn't see. I couldn't get over the fact that I was the first to see it, the last to watch it, the last in the group to watch it disappear over the horizon. But I missed things that other people saw, almost suggesting that I hadn't been there for a while. Now, what confirmed my suspicion was that when I'm trying to figure out why I missed what other people were seeing, one of the girls in our group said to me, "Bruce, where did you go?" And I said to her, "Well, I did walk a little bit. I walked into our neighbor's yard to get a better look of it as it flew away from us and disappeared over the horizon." She said, "No, I saw you in your neighbor's yard." So I have, a number of witnesses that reported observations that lead me to believe this was yet another in a series of abduction events that I experienced as a child and young teenager back in the 60s.
Did your friends ever talk about it again afterwards, maybe a couple of years later or anything like that?
Well, my brother was there, and my mother was there. She's passed away since then. My brother only remembers seeing the UFO. He also remembers, and that's another part of the event, calling the police, and they surprisingly, within a minute or two of the phone call, arrived and actually took a very detailed report of the UFO close encounter. But I have not had the chance to talk to anyone else other than my brother.
Did he ever mention having any experiences throughout childhood or anything like that, like you did?
Other people?
Or
no, I've talked to him at length, and he doesn't. He doesn't recall any experiences, and he's read the book. We've talked about the book, and he doesn't have that experience. Now, I mean, other people in my family, my father, my grandfather. I talk in the book how I've had the experience of having unexplained nosebleeds, and I do remember a nasal implant. I do recall that. I recall an implant of specific structure. It was maybe like a BB from a BB gun, 2 to 3 millimeters in diameter, metallic with studs or projections on the outside. And I think, I remember that I was warned that it could come out of my nose. So I don't know I don't know who warned me of this, but that's how I drawn the conclusion that it was a nasal implant, like a lot of abductees have reported. And my grandfather had actually a medical condition called cavernous sinus thrombosis, where he had no previous medical procedure, no surgical procedure, no dental procedure, but lost his life because he had this particular infection in one of the blood sinuses behind his nasal cavity that developed into a meningitis that took his life. And I describe in detail how it was more likely that was caused by a nasal implant procedure than it arose spontaneously as a result of a head cold, because that particular condition of cavernous sinus thrombosis only occurred in 1 in 19 million people. Wow. And so that's why I think there were other people in my family that had this particular type of abduction experience.
How did you first find the implant? Was it the voice first, or could you feel?
I never did. I never did. All I had a glimpse. I had a fragment of a memory of this particular object. Remember what it looked like. Remember how it felt. but I remember that I had been warned that if I blew my nose too hard or if I sneezed too forcefully, it could come out. And I seem to recall that it had come out before. And this is the vaguest part of the memory by far. I think it had come out and I hurriedly, nervously discarded it, either down the sink, in the toilet. I'm not as sure of that particular part of the memory as I am of the other aspects of the memory. But I think it probably did come out, and I didn't know what it was. I have to tell you something else, which is really remarkable, Ash. There was another podcaster who read and reviewed my book, claimed that he had experience with the same type of implant. He has had strange nosebleeds and similar experiences similar to mine, missing time and so forth, and also recalled the same type of object. And there's one other person that also had. I don't know if you've read the work of Raymond Fowler, who talked about the experiences of Betty Andreasson in the Andreasson affair. But in the 60s, Betty Andreasson uh, also had these abduction experiences, taken on board a UFO, where she was subjected to this nasal implantation procedure, and remembers the same type of object being removed from her nose that looked exactly like what I remember being inside my nose. Very remarkable in terms of the similarity of details from abductee to abductee in many cases.
Fascinating. Fascinating. Are these experiences, did they continue into adulthood? Like, when's the sort of last time that you've had, can remember having an experience?
I really can't be sure of that, Ash. I've had some strange things happen. Nothing that was very similar to what happened to me in my childhood and early adult life, but they're suggestive that I've had encounters, bedroom encounters, where entities came into the bedroom, but much less definite, in that I don't have a lot of recall of exactly who was there, what I saw. But I have to say that I can't rule out that these experiences still aren't occurring. Um, I there are times I feel a number of times. Not only was there an entry into my bedroom of some entity, but I actually feel the touch of some type of being tapped on the forehead. Um, and I wake up and there's no one in the room, almost as if I think someone had suggested the whoever was doing some type, whatever ET or alien was doing the procedure on me, was making sure I was okay. It was kind of tapping me on the forehead to wake me up to make sure I was all right. Nothing more definitive than that, um, you know, at least in terms of what I can consciously recall.
On that, so do you have any theories as to why, like, some people like yourself can remember this stuff, and there's some people that don't have any memories unless they're being regressed? Any kind of thoughts around why certain people do?
Yeah, there are a number of theories. The theory I talk about in the book is that I go over um, some of the ways that um, memories, the consolidation of memories, can be deliberately interfered with. Um, and I talk about some of the neural mechanisms that account for that. But I think there are certain aspects of memory that involve changes in gene expression, changes in um, cellular synthesis of proteins that really cannot be that perhaps that cannot be blocked, that may account for why certain memory traces of memories remain embedded in the cells in the brain, so that you know if the aliens are trying to eliminate memory by some mechanism, whether they're using the implants to do this, I'm not sure. They're not able to do it in a way that would eliminate every part of the memory. But that, again, that's just my theory for how certain neurophysiological mechanisms can account for why some parts of the experience can be recalled consciously.
Cool. One question that's randomly just come to me. You mentioned before about kind of you've done work on drugs and the effect that drugs can have on the brain and stuff like that. I've talked to a lot of people that use DMT as a way to, like, other hallucinogenics kind
Right.
of enter the other realm or have these experiences, and that believe that opens them up to like the paranormal and stuff like that. What's kind of your thoughts behind that, having done this similar type of research?
Well, there's research being done now that's trying to identify specific regions in the brain, particularly the basal ganglia, that other people have focused on the pineal gland as a gateway to, a not only contact with aliens or interdimensionals, but to a kind of a cosmic consciousness, and so that may be the portal to that enables some particular individuals, to interact with, to actually see and interact with perhaps interdimensionals. And the interesting thing is there's research that's being done in the past couple of years that indicates that remote viewers and abduction experiences have denser nerve cell connections in the basal ganglia, suggesting that this accounts for why certain individuals have the ability to interact with ETs or maybe aliens and even communicate with them telepathically. Now, I don't know if there's any studies being done to try to understand how we can wake up this part of the brain in non-experiencers so they could actually see and the same things the experiencers and remote viewers are seeing and have the same experiences. But that would be something that would be a logical thing to investigate in the future.
Definitely, it's definitely interesting. Lots of, the amount of theories and stuff that you can go down with this is pretty limited.
Right.
I guess. So coming towards the end of your book, you have kind of an afterword section where you talk about some discussion around greys and being genetically engineered of familiar humans. You want to kind of talk about that theory that you talk about in the book?
Well, I was just struck by reading Lieutenant Colonel Philip Corso's book, Day After Roswell, because he was the intelligence officer that collected all the debris from the crash at Roswell. Not only that, he claims he had seen one of the bodies that was recovered of the aliens that died in the crash at Roswell. Not only that, years later, read the autopsy reports done by the pathologist at Walter Reed Hospital on the Roswell aliens, and the pathologists were found it quite remarkable how similar anatomically, physiologically the greys were to us, but yet showed some very interesting differences. They didn't have a reproductive system, didn't have a digestive system, didn't have an excretory system, no kidneys, no bladder, and then caused those pathologists to theorize they were able to obtain nutrition through their skin and excrete waste through their skin. And I describe in the book that it would be quite straightforward molecular biology, if not for human beings today, but certainly for an advanced civilization, to knock out just a very limited number of genes using techniques like we have, the CRISPR gene editing technique or something perhaps much more advanced than that, to create these genetically engineered beings that, because they don't have a number of organ systems, can devote more of their energy to mental activity. It's called the expensive tissue hypothesis, and this may account for why human beings develop their big brains, because they were able to um, de- develop in a way where more of their energy and nutrition could be utilized for the brain at the expense of other tissues of the body. So the evidence the scientific studies I discussed that suggesting this is a very straightforward genetic engineering type of a project, um, suggests that these aliens were genetically engineered for a purpose by some higher species to what I call them technicians. Their purpose was to act as technicians from some more advanced principal investigators that are studying human beings, that are subjecting human beings to some type of experimentation. We don't know what the goals of those, experiments are. It may be to accelerate human evolution, or maybe to create hybrid species that the advanced alien species that's directing the graves has some unknown purpose for. It has some hidden agenda that involves these hybrids. And I suggest one of the possibilities is that they want to exert some type of influence over human affairs by integrating these hybrids that look just like you and I into human society. Again, it's just one theory. I hope for the best. I hope that this advanced civilization has our best interests at heart, but they may have their own interest in mind, in terms of why they've come to us, taken us out of our homes, and subjected us to these type of invasive experiments against our will.
Oh, definitely. And kind of, what's your take on the recent whistleblowing from likes of Grush, and just last week I can't remember the guy's name, is it Bethenberger, the Immaculate Constellation stuff about the crash retrievals and retrieving the non-human intelligence stuff. What do you kind of think about that? All this recent
Well,
news that's been happening in the last couple of years.
well, all of these admissions, um, all of the things that Lou Elizondo and David Grush are reporting are very consistent to what's been reported in the UFO literature and the UFO abduction literature for decades. It confirms what we've all suspected and even believed, and in many cases been convinced of. So I don't think anything they've said has been inconsistent with the other sources of evidence that it looks like mainstream scientific community, the media, and our government has been ignorant of for 50 years or more. Now, I don't know if we're going to learn anything more in terms of direct confirmation that everything we've learned, people that have been watching this phenomenon, is actually real, or whether or not they're going to try to keep everything secret because of the potential military applications of this knowledge that has been learned from the cross as a result of the crash at Roswell and other crashes and other forms of evidence. So I don't know where that's going to go. I hope for the best of it, but as I've said before, perhaps the greatest source of disclosure will be the personal disclosure of the experiencers, of the commercial airline pilots and the military pilots, and we're all coming together to explain to the public what is really happening, even when the government and military won't admit to it explicitly.
Awesome. So excellent chat with you. Do you want to give us a final word on why people should buy your book and where they can buy it if they wish?
Well, my book basically can be obtained on Amazon. Dominion Lost and a scientist own alien abduction encounters, and I try to tell my experiences in a straightforward fashion with as many details as possible. And many people have said it's so incredibly detailed they feel as if they were there with me while I had these experiences. And I do try to analyze it scientifically, and which I think makes my case for the reality of this phenomenon that much more persuasive. So I think I bring my experiences together with reports of so many witnesses that it has the effect of, I think, persuading the reader who was a skeptic before he read the book that probably he should look at this particular phenomenon a little bit more carefully before he makes up her or she makes up her mind about whether or not they believe it. And I think that that my book can help them reach that decision.
Brilliant. Yes, so make sure you go out and buy Dominion Lost by Bruce Rapuano on Amazon. And if you do, let us know how you find it. It's certainly, like I say, the way you put together is very readable. It really is readable. And the stuff in there is like some of the stuff we talked about today. It's just incredible. And with your background and scientific knowledge as well, just makes it even that extra bit of extra to it as well.
Thank you.
Which is great. But yeah, thanks for your time, Bruce. It's been a great chat. And,
thanks for having me, Ash. I enjoyed talking to you.
Evening.
Appreciate it.
I will speak soon.
Take care, sir.
Thanks for listening to Pursuit of the Paranormal with Ash Ellis. Title music created by Steve Yarwood and Ambiinfinity. If you like the show, please follow us on Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, X, and Instagram. And if you really like the show, please rate and review the show wherever you are listening. It really does help. See you next time, and until then, stay weird.